So they were removed in a very sloppy, very ham-handed, very political manner. I make no apologies for that. What I will tell you, though, is the exploitation of this issue and its blowing it up beyond any proportion to the extent that it is today, and it's driven 17 oversight hearings in Congress, is very simple. The Justice Department was finally, for the first time, doing two things to enforce civil rights. It was taking the civil rights gains which we made, which were very important in the 1960s, saying that we make sure that everyone has a right to vote, we abolish poll taxes, we abolish voter intimidation, we make sure that everyone has a right to vote, and does vote if they wish to. That's a civil right, but there's another civil right. Each and every one of you, especially in Chicago, you should appreciate this, has a civil right not to have your vote canceled out by someone who shouldn't be voting, someone who doesn't exist, someone who's voting twice. That's a civil right too. Because if someone votes who shouldn't vote, or a vote cast that is completely invalid, it cancels out your vote. It's as if you never voted. That cancels out your civil right too. So there are two ways you can be prevented from voting or have your vote canceled out. The Justice Department was finally enforcing this, bringing lawsuits and cases and cracking down. Well, the people around Hillary Clinton aren't interested in that. I mean, I did a book in which I talked to a former Democratic congressman who said, so you want to talk about shenanigans at the polls? And I said, yes. And he says, well, your friends just don't get it. And I said, why? They don't understand what this is all about. I said, well, enlighten me. And he said, your friends, these Republicans, they, most of them come from something I've heard is called the private sector. If they lose an election, they go back into this private sector thing, and they have a living. My friends, they gotta win these elections, or they don't eat. You'll do an awful lot if you're not eating. And sometimes you'll do things you're not proud of, and sometimes you'll do things that you wouldn't otherwise do in order to make sure that you put food on the table. And if you want to know what this issue is all about, he said, that's what this issue is all about. People got to eat. Well, some people are so interested in eating. Actually, I think they're overeating if you take a look at how much government is spending. Voter fraud, I think, is going to be a serious part of the opposition coalition's campaign in 2008. And all of this was designed to intimidate the Justice Department not to investigate and not to look at it. On the other hand, if you've intimidated people and lowered the bar or the obstacles to doing this, you're going to get more of it. And that's why I suspect that one of the most important things that can happen in 2008 is, will there be enough people with political courage to step up and say, we actually have to enforce both civil rights? I think there will be, but I'll tell you, they've knocked the wind out of a lot of people's sails by positing the fact that just asking for voter ID is de facto racism. Think about it. We ask for voter ID to get into the federal building here in Chicago. We ask for voter ID to check into most hotels now, or photo ID. We ask for photo ID to rent a video at Blockbusters, to travel even on Greyhound or Amtrak. The only thing we don't ask photo ID for is voting. I wonder why that's the only exception. Just thinking. 3 opportunities. There is some good news. The courts are good news. We've had 7 years now of Bush administration appointments to the court. I think they're going to be one of his finest legacies. And they've paid off, with the exception of the lamentable Harriet Miers and her appointment, which I think a lot of people in this room had something to do with, because the conservative movement's finest moment was when Bush nominated Harriet Miers and the conservative movement said, this is your right to make the appointment, but we deserve better, and this is not a good enough appointment. And we ended up with Sam Alito, who I think is turning out to be a fine justice. This morning, the Supreme Court, by vote of 5-4, which shows you one vote does make a difference, overturned a large chunk of the McCain Feingold campaign finance laws. This is the premier liberal blog on campaign finance issues by Rick Hazen, who's a law professor at Loyola. Today's opinion is a major victory for those who oppose campaign finance regulation and will likely lead to an evisceration of much of the law in the 2008 election season. It has revealed the Roberts Court, as I have feared, is moving firmly into the deregulation camp, with the Chief Justice and Justice Alito cleverly dressing up the opinion as a minimalist incremental decision. It is nothing from close to that. My hope that Justice Kennedy's respect for stare decisis, meaning precedent, could save the elements that were thrown out today has been dashed. So the courts are having an impact. That's one of the reasons why the U.S. Senate, which is now under Democratic control, is blocking almost every judicial appointment. Another opportunity is the new media. There's a reason they want to bring the fairness doctrine back. The new media has swept aside the gatekeepers. Believe me, I'm sure some of you remember just how tightly controlled the gatekeepers had it. When Ronald Reagan was elected president in 1980, there were 3 networks. CNN didn't even exist. 3 networks. You got your choice of John Chancellor, Frank Reynolds, or Walter Cronkite, and that was it. That was it. Or radio. There were 40 talk radio stations because of the fairness doctrine. There were 2,200 talk radio stations. There were 40 in 1980. Magazines. Now you can have magazines for almost any political point of view because they're available online, cheaply distributed. Newspapers. There were effectively no national newspapers in 1980. The Journal was a national paper, but it was basically a business-only paper. Now you have national papers everywhere. You can buy almost anything everywhere, and you can get anything you want on the internet. This is an astonishing array of media opportunities. Now, it is true that they can be misused. I mean, Mark Twain's famous line, "A lie can get halfway across the globe while the truth is still getting on its boots," still applies. But I believe, if you believe that what you stand for and what free market principles stand for are fact-based, based in rationality and reason, and are objectively real, if you believe that, I'll take all the lies and I'll take all the truth, and if they have a fair platform, I can predict who's going to win in the end with most people. And I think that that's the case. There's now a fair playing field for ideas in this country, and it wasn't the case with the electronic media, certainly, even 25 years ago. Lastly, the other opportunity is the rest of the world. Certainly, a lot of people are nervous about India and China and the emerging economies of Eastern Europe, the old Soviet bloc, and they should be. But I view this as an incredible opportunity. 17 countries have now adopted the flat tax. 17 countries, including most of Eastern Europe. Russia, despite its authoritarian tendencies, is smart enough to have adopted the flat tax. It's working. It's working so well in Estonia, they've cut the rates from 26 to 21, and they're looking to lower to 19 in a couple of years. I will predict in the next 10 years, either India or China goes to a flat tax. I'll put money on that bet. When that happens, the competitive pressures that will unleash on us, forget the dispute about the pegging of the renminbi, the Chinese currency, to our dollar. If they have a flat tax, we're going to pay attention. And believe me, they are talking about it in their Politburo. Because they may be communists, but they want the fattest golden goose possible. And that's what they're aiming for. So, the rest of the world used to be our adversary because it was still more statist and collectivist than we are. And much of it still is. But I have to tell you, there is progress. I got a phone call 3 days ago from the new finance minister of France. France. She lived for 20 years in Chicago. She was the managing partner of Baker & McKenzie. She is basically an American. Her name is Christine Lagarde. She lived in Chicago for 20 years. She's now the finance minister of France. That says 2 things. One, the French are not nearly as isolationist and not nearly as anti-American as they used to be, because they've basically got a half-American running their finance ministry. That's how pragmatic they've gotten. And 2, we bring people here, we teach them things, and they learn things, and they bring them back to their other countries. And we have this constant recycling of people. We bring back and forth. It's to our benefit, and now it's going to be to their benefit. If France decollectivizes and France cuts tax rates, and France starts to become a less centralized, dirigiste economy, we'll have made some real progress, and we'll have had something to do with it. I'll just leave you with one lesson that Ronald Reagan taught me, because I grew up in California. Ronald Reagan had a long political career that was a lot of ups and downs. I mean, he got into politics speaking for Barry Goldwater, that famous television speech, The Speech, a week before Goldwater lost 44 states. What was Reagan's response? That was a loss. I'm going to run for governor of California. And 2 years later, he won by 1 million votes. Reagan's career is a series of crushing defeats for the conservative movement and him taking the opportunity and moving forward and not giving up. In 1976, Reagan lost the Republican nomination narrowly to Gerald Ford.